Ilara had always lived in the quiet shadow of her brother, Darien. In the small village of Arendor, where the winds carried the scent of frost and the distant roar of the northern mountains, life had never been easy. Their father had died when they were young, leaving Darien to care for the household, but care, it seemed, was not in his nature. He had a restless energy, a hunger for wealth, and a blind faith in luck. Ilara, by contrast, was cautious, gentle, and aware of the delicate balance of life. She tended the small garden behind their cottage, spoke kindly to neighbors, and spent evenings reading the old scrolls she had rescued from the village library. She knew the stories of kings and queens, of curses that lingered in the shadows, and of spirits that roamed abandoned castles. They were tales to warn, tales to teach, but never did she imagine she would live inside one. Darien, however, had no patience for caution. One evening, he returned to the cottage, his hands empty, and eyes bright with feverish excitement. "Gold, Ilara," he said, slapping a coin purse onto the table. "I've found a wager that will set us free." "Freedom, sister. Enough with this small village life. We could live like nobles in the city of Arthelon." Ilara frowned, her fingers brushing the coins he had just tossed carelessly. "Darien, you've been gambling for months. You promised father you would stop. You can't risk everything again." Darien laughed, a sound that rang too loudly in the small cottage. "Risk? Ha! Life is all risk. Besides, this is no ordinary gamble. I've been invited to the northern stronghold, Lord Carith Valen himself. He holds treasures no one has seen in a generation. Gold, lands, power." Ilara's stomach sank. She had heard whispers of Carith Valen. Some called him cursed, others called him cruel. His fortress stood in the northern mountains, a dark place where storms seemed to linger even when the sky was clear. No one returned from his games with their fortunes intact. "And what if you lose?" she asked softly. Darien waved her away. "Lose? Nonsense. I have luck on my side. And even if I lose, I can offer something of value instead." Ilara felt a shiver, though she tried to ignore it. She did not know what he meant. That night, Darien rode off, his horse kicking up dust in the moonlight. Ilara stayed behind, staring at the empty road, a heavy dread in her chest. Something in the northern wind whispered warnings, though she could not understand the words. When Darien returned, the sun had barely risen. He was not laughing. His eyes were hollow, and the coin purse in his hand had vanished. I lost, Ilara," he said, voice trembling. "I lost everything." Ilara's heart tightened. "Everything?" He nodded. Then he lowered his gaze. I promised something. Something of equal value. And I gave them your name." Her stomach dropped. "What? Darien, you cannot." "It is done," he said, a note of panic breaking through his usual bravado. "They will come for you." Before she could speak, a shadow moved outside the cottage. Heavy boots struck the earth. Cloaks black as midnight appeared in the doorway. The crest on their shoulders, an unfamiliar symbol shaped like a black phoenix, made her knees weaken. A voice, deep and cold as winter itself, spoke. "Ilara Valen," it said. "Lord Carith claims what was promised." Ilara's heart pounded as she realized she had no choice. The men offered no room for argument. They did not touch her, did not raise their hands in anger. They only bowed slightly and waited. Her brother tried to reach for her, but she shook her head. "Darien, go. Save yourself." He did not move. The men's hands rested on their hilts. Silent threats. Darien swallowed, his face pale. I am so sorry, Ilara." They mounted their horses, and she was led away, the wind biting her cheeks as they crossed hills and rivers toward the northern mountains. The fortress loomed on the horizon, a jagged silhouette against the stormy sky. Its towers were crowned with frost, and a faint green glow pulsed from the windows. The air smelled of iron and snow. Inside, the halls were vast and silent. Shadows seemed to slither along the walls, though no one walked there. And at the heart of the fortress, waiting as if he had been expecting her, was Lord Carith Vallon. He was tall, with broad shoulders cloaked in dark armor. His hair was black as raven's wings, and his eyes gray, storm-tossed, studied her like one might study a rare bird. His expression was unreadable, yet there was an intensity that made her heart both race and ache. He spoke, his voice smooth and chilling. "Your brother lost you in a bet. You belong to me now. I can love you whenever I choose." Elara's throat tightened. She had expected cruelty, perhaps mockery, but this calm certainty was different. Dangerous, yet strange. There was no gloating in his tone, no joy in her misfortune. I am not yours," she said, though her voice trembled. Carith tilted his head. "Perhaps not yet," he said softly, "but you will remain here. You will live in my fortress, and you will learn that fate is not always kind or fair." Days passed, and the fortress revealed itself to be a place of whispers and shadows. Hallways twisted impossibly. Windows looked out onto storms that seemed eternal. At night, faint voices called her name. And always, Carith watched, sometimes near, sometimes distant, but always with those storm-gray eyes. Elara refused to bend to fear. She explored the halls, learning the quiet rhythm of the fortress. She tended the small gardens inside, read old tomes she found in the library, and practiced patience. She would not give him power over her heart. Yet at night, she could not sleep. The castle whispered to her. Shadows moved in the corners of her vision. And sometimes, when the wind shook the ancient stones, she thought she heard Carith's voice, soft, almost tender, as if he spoke to her without knowing she was listening. One evening, she found herself near the tallest tower. Lightning split the sky, revealing the vast forest below. And there, standing silently, was Carith. "You should not wander here," he said, though he did not move toward her. "I am learning this place," she replied. "It is strange, but not frightening." He watched her, and for a long moment, said nothing. Finally, his voice broke the silence. "Strange things are awake in these halls," he said quietly. "You must be careful. This. Elara felt her heart twist. There was warning in his words, but also something else. Something that made her want to trust him and fear him at the same time. That night, as she lay in the guest chamber, the walls shook with whispers. Ancient voices, hungry and sorrowful, called her name. And from the shadows outside her door, she heard Carith's deep, resonant voice. "The curse has awakened. Because you are here." Elara's heart pounded. A curse? She had heard the legends, the old stories whispered in the village about spirits and the northern stronghold. She had never believed them until now. The night dragged on. She lay awake, staring at the frost-laced windows, listening to the wind and the distant howl of wolves. Her thoughts returned again and again to her brother, to the reckless gamble that had brought her here, and to the man who claimed her fate with a calm certainty she could not understand. She did not know what awaited her in the fortress of Lord Carith Vallon. She did not know the secrets of the curse or the power that stirred in the shadows. All she knew was that her life had changed forever, and that the fate of her heart, her soul, and perhaps the entire northern realm would be decided in the days to come. The fortress had taken her. The curse had awakened. And Elara, with a mixture of fear and fierce determination, knew one thing: she would not bow without a fight. Cliffhanger. As the clock of the northern keep struck midnight, the wind carried a whisper directly to her chamber. "You are not yet mine, but soon the shadows will claim you." Elara shivered, clutching the thin blanket around her shoulders. Somewhere in the fortress, a presence moved. A presence that was both protector and predator. And outside, the storm raged, promising that her journey into darkness, power, and a dangerous, forbidden bond was only beginning. Elara awoke to the cold glow of dawn filtering through the tall windows of the northern fortress. Her breath made tiny clouds in the air, and frost lined the edges of the glass. The wind outside whispered through the stone towers, carrying a sound that made her shiver, a sound like voices just beyond understanding. She had tried to sleep, but the memories of the previous night, the words of Lord Careth Vallon, and the echoes of her brother's betrayal weighed heavily on her. She rose from the bed and moved to the window, staring out at the endless forests below, dark and trembling beneath the storm clouds. The fortress was alive with secrets, she realized, and she was just beginning to understand that her arrival had stirred something long asleep. A quiet knock came at her door. She turned to see one of the castle servants, a young woman with pale skin and wide, nervous eyes. "Lady Elara," she said softly, "Lord Careth wishes to see you. He says it is urgent." Elara felt a tightening in her chest. She had expected to meet Careth in passing, to see him watch her silently, or to hear his voice echo in the corridors. She had not expected him to call her. "Lead the way," she said, her voice steady despite the flutter in her stomach. The halls were as silent as ever, the shadows long and curling along the stone walls. As she walked, Elara noticed faint glimmers of light dancing in the corners, like dust or perhaps something alive. The servant kept her distance, and Elara felt the air grow heavier, charged with a presence she could not see. When she reached the high tower chamber, Careth was already there. He stood by a window, his back to her, looking down at the forest below. His black cloak shifted with the wind from the open window, and the storm outside mirrored the tension in the room. "You came," he said, not turning around. "I did," Elara replied. "You asked for me." He finally faced her. His eyes, storm gray and unreadable, studied her, as if he were measuring her very soul. For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Then, he spoke. "There is much you do not know," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Much you need to understand if you are to survive here." Elara's heart pounded. "Survive?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Is that what this fortress wants? Or you?" Careth's lips tightened. "Both," he admitted. "And neither. You have awakened the curse that has haunted my bloodline for generations." Elara froze, her mind spun. "A curse?" "Yes," he said, walking closer. "My family has carried it for centuries. It is a shadow that feeds on love, on hope, on devotion. Anyone I truly care for suffers. It is why I have never allowed myself to feel, why I have never loved." Elara's throat tightened. "So, if you were to love me," he shook his head, a bitter edge in his gaze, "it would destroy you. And perhaps me. That is why I took you here. Not out of desire, but out of necessity. To protect you." Elara's mind raced. She had thought he had claimed her because her brother lost a bet, because he was cruel or capricious. Now she realized there was something else, something far more dangerous than the walls, the storms, or even the servants. "Then why tell me?" she asked. "Why not just keep me in the halls and leave me in fear?" Careth's eyes softened, just slightly. "Because you are not like anyone I have ever known. You do not fear me. You do not bend. And that makes this curse stronger, makes it fight harder to survive." Elara shivered. She had thought of herself as clever, cautious, strong, but here, in the northern fortress, she realized how fragile her life had become. And yet, for the first time, she felt a strange connection. Not warmth, exactly, but a pulse of something that made her heart ache, even as fear filled it. The rest of the day passed in a blur of lessons she had not expected. Kareth walked her through the fortress, explaining rules, showing her the hidden doors, and warning her of the spirits that lingered in certain halls. Some rooms shimmered with a faint green light, and shadows moved just beyond her vision, always watching, always whispering. "Why are these spirits here?" Elara asked as they paused in a long corridor, her hands brushing the cold stone walls. "They are remnants of the curse," Kareth said. "They were born from anger, betrayal, and sorrow. They cannot leave the fortress. They hunger for those who are bound to it. Like you." Elara swallowed. She had always believed in stories of ghosts, of spirits lingering for unfinished business. But now, facing the reality of the fortress, she understood how little she had truly known. Night fell, and with it came the first real test of the curse. The lights in her chamber flickered, the shadows stretched long and dark, and in the corner of her vision, she saw a figure shapeless, moving toward her. Heart racing, she called out, "Who's there?" The figure paused. Then, like smoke, it twisted into a shadowy form and vanished. The whispers began soft, sorrowful, and terrifying. They called her name. They begged. They warned. Before fear could consume her, the door opened. Kareth stepped inside, his cloak billowing. The shadows recoiled from him, and a strange energy seemed to hum in the air. "You are not safe here alone," he said. "But do not fear me. I am the one who can stand between you and them." Elara's hands trembled as she stepped back. Then, "Why does it feel like you are part of this curse too?" Kareth's eyes darkened. "Because I am, and because I have tried for centuries to fight it." He moved closer, his presence overwhelming yet protective. For a moment, she saw the man behind the armor, the man who bore centuries of guilt, loneliness, and fear. He was not cruel. He was a prisoner of fate, and she realized, with a jolt, that the very same chains that bound him might bind her as well. Days turned into nights, and nights into long, endless hours of whispered warnings and glimpses of the supernatural. Elara learned to read the signs, the flicker of candlelight that signaled a spirit, the faint chill in the air that foretold danger. And with each passing day, she noticed subtle shifts in Kareth. The way he lingered near her, the way his gaze softened, and the briefest flicker of vulnerability when he thought she was not looking. One evening, as a storm raged outside, the curse made itself known in full force. The halls shook. Shadows stretched and twisted, coalescing into a form that towered over Elara. It was a spirit unlike any she had seen, tall, armored in darkness, eyes glowing with cold fire. Kareth arrived just as the shadow moved toward her. He raised his hands, and a surge of energy erupted, casting the spirit back. The chamber shook with power. Elara's heart raced as the shadow shrieked and vanished into nothingness. Kareth dropped to one knee, breathing heavily. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, the man who claimed her fate looked almost fragile, almost human. "Elara," he said, his voice trembling, "if I let myself care for you, the curse will destroy everything. You must understand that." Elara stepped closer, her own fear mingling with a growing, unspoken feeling. "I am not afraid of you," she said quietly, "nor of the curse. But I will not let you face it alone either." For a long moment, he looked at her, the storm raging behind him, and the fortress itself seeming to hold its breath. Then he nodded slowly, a silent acknowledgement of trust one neither had fully earned but both were beginning to give. The hours that followed were tense and silent. The storm outside raged, and the fortress seemed alive with whispering spirits. Elara lay in her chamber, unable to sleep, thinking of the man who had claimed her as a prize yet now seemed bound to protect her. Her heart ached with fear and curiosity, longing and confusion. In the dead of night, A whisper carried to her ears, not from Kareth, not from the servants, but from the shadows themselves. You belong to him, and he will belong to you. The curse is not yet broken. Ilara shivered. She did not know whether to feel fear, hope, or a strange mixture of both. One thing was certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The fortress, the curse, and the man who had claimed her fate were intertwined in ways she could not yet understand. Cliffhanger. As the storm reached its peak, the shadows in the hallways swirled into a single, massive shape. A voice, older than time itself, echoed through the fortress. Your soul is the key. Soon, one of you will break, or be broken. Ilara's heart pounded. Somewhere in the fortress, Kareth stood ready, his presence both shield and danger. The first real test of their bond, their courage, and their fate was only beginning. The storm that had rattled the northern fortress for days finally began to ebb, leaving the halls damp and glistening with frost. Yet the calm did little to ease the tension within. Ilara could feel the weight of the curse pressing on her like an invisible chain, and she knew that each step she took in the fortress brought her closer to a fate she did not choose. Kareth moved silently beside her through the long, twisting corridors, the shadows clinging to him as if they feared him. His eyes were focused, alert. But there was an intensity she had not noticed before, something like worry, and something else. A deep, unspoken longing. Why do the spirits grow stronger? Ilara asked quietly, her voice echoing off the cold stone. They feed on the bond between us, Kareth replied without hesitation. Not our love, yet, but the potential for it. The more we rely on each other, the more power they gain. They test us, push us, to see if the curse will claim what it desires. Ilara's chest tightened. She had felt that power when the shadow appeared in her chamber, the sheer force that tried to consume her. She had also felt Kareth's protection, the energy that surged from him to repel it. For the first time, she understood that their fates were entwined, not by chance, but by something older and darker than either of them. As they reached the central hall, a gust of wind swept through the high windows. Candles flickered, casting long, dancing shadows. A strange green light glimmered from the corners, revealing ghostly shapes that had not been there before. Figures of warriors, some armored, others skeletal, moved as if trapped in silent combat. Ilara swallowed hard. Are they all spirits? Kareth nodded grimly. Each one is bound to this fortress, to my bloodline. They were once protectors, now prisoners. They cannot leave, and they hunger for freedom. They test every soul that walks these halls. Ilara's hand brushed the edge of a pillar, and she could feel a faint vibration, a pulse that matched her heartbeat. The fortress itself seemed alive, reacting to their presence. She realized that to survive here, she would need more than courage. She would need understanding. The next days were a careful dance of caution and observation. Kareth guided her, teaching her how to sense the spirit's presence, how to read the faint movements in the shadows, and how to protect herself. They spent hours in the library, poring over ancient texts and maps of the fortress, searching for clues to the curse's origin. During these lessons, a strange familiarity began to grow between them. Ilara noticed the way Kareth's expression softened when he thought she was not looking, the way his hand would linger near a door handle or a weapon, as if preparing to protect her without asking. She saw the man behind the dark armor, a man burdened by centuries of fear, but also capable of care, even tenderness. One evening, as they traced the symbols carved into the ritual chamber's floor, a shadow coalesced in the corner. It was tall, armored in darkness, its eyes glowing faintly like embers. Ilara froze. Kareth stepped in front of her, hands raised, and the shadow hissed, advancing with unnatural speed. He muttered a word under his breath, and a wave of energy erupted from him, forcing the spirit backward. The chamber trembled, dust falling from the ceiling, and Ilara's heart raced. "You are not safe," Kareth said, his voice low and urgent. "The curse does not forgive weakness." Ilara met his gaze, and for the first time, she saw vulnerability in him. His face, so composed and controlled before, now bore the strain of centuries-old fear. He had tried to face this curse alone, to shield others from it, and now she realized how much it had cost him. "I am not afraid," she said softly. Kareth's eyes flickered with something she could not name. Relief, perhaps, or awe. He stepped closer, the shadows of the room twisting around him, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The days that followed were filled with challenges. The curse's strength grew, and with it, the spirits became more daring. Doors slammed shut, corridors shifted, and spectral hands reached from the walls. Each night, Ilara and Kareth were forced to work together, defending themselves against creatures born of sorrow and rage. Each night, they discovered more about each other. The fears they carried, the guilt they bore, and the faint glimmers of hope they hid from the world. Ilara discovered her own strength in the process. She could sense the shadows before they moved, anticipate the spirits' attacks, and even manipulate the light in the hallways to confuse them. Kareth watched her, sometimes silently, sometimes with a shadow of a smile, and she felt a spark of something that frightened her almost as much as the spirits themselves. One night, as they rested in the library, she dared to speak what had been on her mind. "Kareth, why did you take me here? Not for the bet, but for yourself?" He looked at her, his storm-gray eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight. "Because I could not let the curse claim you, and because I feared what would happen if I did not try to protect you. You are not just a part of this fortress. You are a part of me, whether I wish it or not." Ilara felt a shiver run down her spine. His words were both terrifying and comforting. They spoke of danger and connection, of power and restraint, of emotions they were not ready to fully name. Suddenly, a scream echoed through the halls. A spirit had breached the outer corridor, moving toward the library with incredible speed. Kareth leapt to his feet, and Ilara followed instinctively. Together, they confronted the creature, their movements in sync despite the chaos. The shadow advanced, hissing and shifting, and Kareth unleashed a wave of energy that pushed it back. Ilara raised her hands, calling the light to her command, and the combined force of their powers drove the spirit back into the darkness. The chamber trembled, but they stood firm, panting. Kareth looked at her, his expression raw. "Do you understand now?" he asked. "We cannot deny this bond. It is what gives us strength and what the curse wants to destroy." Ilara met his gaze, her own heart racing. "I understand, and I will not run from it." The storm outside quieted, leaving the fortress in a fragile silence. Yet even in that calm, Ilara could sense the lingering presence of the curse. It was patient. It was waiting. And it would not be satisfied until one of them, perhaps both, had broken. As the night deepened, the shadows in the hallways began to swirl together, forming a single, massive figure. It spoke in a voice that echoed like the wind through the mountains, ancient and terrible. "You are bound together," it said. "The bond will be tested. One of you will fall, or be broken." Ilara's heart raced. She felt Kareth's hand brush hers, a fleeting contact that sent warmth through her despite the chill. For the first time, she understood the truth of his words. Their survival depended not just on courage or skill, but on trust and perhaps something more. That night, as they prepared to rest, Kareth spoke quietly, almost to himself. "If I let myself care, it will destroy you. And yet, I cannot help it." Ilara did not respond immediately. She could feel the weight of the curse pressing down, the ancient power of the fortress, and the dangerous pull between them. And yet, Beneath it all, she felt a spark of hope, a belief that together they could face whatever was coming. Cliffhanger. As the first light of dawn touched the frost-covered windows, a shadow detached itself from the walls. The ghost queen, the heart of the curse, appeared before them, her eyes like cold stars, pointing directly at Alara. "Your soul is the final key," she hissed. "At sunrise, she will be mine." Alara's heart froze. She turned to Kareth, and in his storm-gray eyes, she saw both fear and determination. They were bound together by the curse, by danger, and by something deeper they had yet to name. The final test was coming, and the choices they would make would not only determine their survival, but the fate of their hearts, and the legacy of a curse older than time itself. Dawn broke over the northern fortress, pale light spilling across the frost-lined stone. The wind had quieted, but the air remained tense, heavy with the presence of the curse. Alara stood in the tallest tower, her hands gripping the cold windowsill, her heart pounding. She could feel the pulse of the fortress beneath her feet, the restless spirits whispering, restless and hungry. Kareth entered silently, his cloak brushing the floor. His eyes, storm-gray as ever, studied her face with intensity. There was a weight in his gaze, a burden he could not put into words, but she understood. The final test was coming, and the fate of them both rested on it. "They're here," he said quietly, nodding toward the hall below. "The heart of the curse has awakened. The ghost queen will appear at sunrise. She will try to take you. Only together can we stop her." Alara swallowed hard. The thought of the ghost queen, the spirit that had haunted the fortress for centuries, filled her with fear. She had faced shadows, spirits, and whispers, but this was different. This was the origin of all the darkness that had stalked Kareth's bloodline. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "We face this together." Kareth nodded. He reached out and took her hand, the first time their fingers truly intertwined. A surge of warmth flowed from his touch, and Alara felt something she had not expected: strength, courage, and a connection that reached beyond fear. The halls shook as the ghost queen appeared. She was magnificent and terrible, clad in spectral robes that shimmered like ice and shadow. Her eyes burned with cold fire as she glided toward them. "You dare defy me?" she hissed. Her voice echoed through the fortress, reverberating in every stone, every shadow. "You are mine, child of fate. The curse demands you." Alara felt the shadows press around her, trying to pull her into darkness. But Kareth stood firmly beside her, his hand on her shoulder, anchoring her. "We are not yours," he said, his voice steady, commanding. "This ends now." The ghost queen's form twisted, a swirl of ice and shadow. She struck with a force that made the walls tremble. Kareth raised his hands, releasing a wave of energy that clashed against her attack. Alara closed her eyes and reached out with her own strength, calling the light she had learned to summon, weaving it into Kareth's energy. Together, their combined power struck the ghost queen, pushing her back. The fortress shook, dust falling from the high ceilings, shadows writhing in every corner. Alara's heart raced. She felt the energy of the curse, the centuries of sorrow and rage, pressing against her. But she did not falter. She held Kareth's hand, feeling the surge of connection between them, the bond that had grown stronger with every trial. "You cannot win," the ghost queen hissed, her voice a mixture of rage and despair. "The curse is eternal." Alara met Kareth's eyes, and in that moment, she understood. The curse was not eternal. It fed on fear, on doubt, on separation. Its power could be broken if they faced it together, if they did not allow it to divide them. With a shared breath, they stepped forward, channeling every ounce of their will, their courage, their trust, and their unspoken care for each other. A blinding light erupted, filling the chamber, pushing the shadows back, breaking the icy grip of the ghost queen. The spirit screamed, a sound that echoed through the mountains, and then, with a final flicker of light, she dissolved into nothingness. The fortress fell silent. The oppressive weight lifted. For the first time in centuries, the halls felt alive with calm rather than fear. Elara sank to her knees, exhausted, her hands trembling. Kareth knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You did it," he said softly. "We did it. Together." Tears welled in Elara's eyes. The fear, the struggle, the nights of uncertainty, all of it had led to this. She had faced shadows, spirits, and a man she had feared and yet trusted. And now, they had emerged victorious, their bond unbroken. Kareth's hand covered hers, warm and steady. "Elara, I have carried this curse for centuries. I thought I could face it alone. I thought I could protect everyone by keeping myself distant. But I was wrong. You are stronger than any curse, stronger than I ever imagined." Elara looked at him, her heart swelling. "And you protected me. Not just from the curse, but from fear itself. You showed me courage, and you showed me care. I never thought I could trust anyone like this, not even my brother." He smiled, faint but real, the first true smile she had seen on him. "Then we are free," he said. "Free of the curse, and free to choose what comes next." For a long moment, they sat together, hands intertwined, letting the silence of the fortress settle around them. The ghosts had gone, the shadows had faded, and even the wind seemed gentler, less insistent. The fortress itself seemed to sigh, relieved, its ancient burdens lifted. Then, as if the world itself had shifted, Kareth leaned closer. "Elara, I do not know what the future holds, but I know this. I cannot imagine facing it without you." Elara's breath caught. She had feared the curse, the fortress, even Kareth himself. But she had never feared her own feelings. "Nor can I," she whispered. "Whatever comes, we face it together." And in that quiet chamber, amidst the frost and stone, a new bond was forged. One not of fear, not of obligation, but of choice. Two hearts, tested by shadows and trials, now beating in unison. Over the next days, the fortress changed. The oppressive air lifted. The shadows no longer twisted with malice. The halls, once silent with whispers, now seemed alive with possibility. Elara explored the rooms she had once feared, discovering beauty where there had been only darkness. Kareth, too, changed. The armor he wore seemed lighter, his movements less guarded, and the intensity in his eyes softened with each passing day. He laughed a rare, genuine sound and shared stories of the fortress before the curse, of joys he had never allowed himself to remember. One evening, as they walked through the garden, frost sparkling on every leaf, Kareth stopped and took her hands in his. "Elara," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "I do not ask for forgiveness, for you have never owed me anything. But I ask, will you stay? Not because of fate, not because of the curse, but because you choose to?" Elara's heart soared. She had faced fear, shadows, and centuries-old curses, and now she understood the depth of what she felt. "Yes," she said, her voice steady, filled with certainty. "I choose to stay. With you." He smiled, relief and joy mingling in his eyes. "Then we begin anew," he said. And together they stepped into the dawn, leaving behind centuries of darkness. As the fortress bathed in the first light of morning, the ghosts of the past were gone. The curse that had haunted Kareth's bloodline was broken not by power alone, but by courage, trust, and the bond they had forged. Elara and Kareth stood at the highest tower, hands intertwined, looking out over the northern forests. The wind was gentle, carrying with it the promise of a future they would face together. The trials were not forgotten, but the weight had lifted, replaced by hope, strength, and a love born not of fate, but of choice. The fortress, once a place of fear and shadows, had become a home for hearts tested by darkness and strengthened by trust. And as they watched the sun rise, its golden light touching the frost-covered stones, Elara realized something profound. Sometimes, the greatest magic is not in the spells, the curses, or the shadows, but in the courage to face the unknown together, and in the power of a heart willing to love despite fear. Kareth turned to her, a soft smile playing on his lips. "Whatever comes next, we face it together," he said. Elara nodded, resting her head against his shoulder. "Together," she whispered, and for the first time in centuries, the fortress was silent with peace, alive with hope, and a love that would endure far beyond any curse.